Hello, this is Professor Miller, and I am back with another lecture slideshow. This one is on the novel Tracks by Louise Erdrich. For this one, you're going to want to make sure you have the settings set so that you can see the PowerPoint video. The PowerPoint is on the screen, and my image should be either in the lower right corner or not visible, whichever you prefer. So use the buttons and the mouse to click on the appropriate icons and change the settings so that you can see and read the text on the PowerPoint slideshow if you haven't done that already. All right, so this is the last novel, the last reading assigned in our class, and it's the most challenging one, so you'll want to pay close attention to this lecture. I'm hoping to provide you with some tips to better understand the novel so that you can do better on it when you write about it, when you take a quiz on it. It's important that you understand it, and this is the kind of book where a few quick pointers can really do a lot to minimize confusion and advance your understanding of the book. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Our author is Louise Erdrich. She was born in 1954 in Little Falls, Minnesota. Erdrich is alive and writing. She just published a new book. She's the first of 7 children born to a man named Ralph Erdrich, who was a German American, and his wife Rita, who was half French American and half Ojibwe, which is a Native American tribe, a part of the Anishinaabe Nation. Both her parents taught at a boarding school in Wapiton, North Dakota, which was set up by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and her maternal grandfather, Patrick Gourneau, once served as tribal chairman, more or less president, for the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians, which he did for many years. So there's different names for the Native Americans in this book and the tribe to which Erdrich herself belongs. Um, in the most specific sense, they're known as the Chippewa, but in a larger sense, they're also called Ojibwe and Anishinaabe. I'm doing my best with those pronunciations, so I hope you will forgive me if I'm a little off on them. So when I speak of these different tribes, understand that they're different categories of the same, ultimately the same group of people, just more specific ways of talking about the tribe as you get down to different denominations of it. So that's how that works. More on Louise Erdrich. As a child, Erdrich's father used to pay her a nickel for every story she wrote. And she cites this fact in an interview as the reason she became a writer, which is kind of a great little story. Erdrich married a man named Michael Doris in 1981, and they raised 3 adopted children together, and also 3 biological children, until their separation in 1995 and Doris's subsequent tragic suicide in 1997, a fact which she has written about a great deal. So Louise Erdrich as a writer. Well, she's written 14 novels. She's primarily a novelist, but she's also written nonfiction, collections of poetry, and children's books. In 2009, her novel The Plague of Doves was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, and she's also received the Anisfield Wolf Book Award. In November of 2012, she received the National Book Award for Fiction for her novel The Roundhouse. Like Sherman Alexie and Joy Harjo, who you just finished reading earlier in this module, Erdrich is an important voice in the Native American Renaissance literary movement, a phrase which captures the explosion of literary creativity among Native Americans after the 60s. As a writer, Erdrich was influenced by the great African American Nobel Prize winning writer Toni Morrison, as well as another Nobel Prize winner, the American stream of consciousness writer from the South, from Mississippi, William Faulkner. She's influenced by others as well. She also loves Shakespeare. And she writes in what's called a magic realist style. It's a style that uses many different elements, and it portrays magic as a natural part of reality. Magic and reality mix and mingle in magic realist works in a way that shows us that the ordinary is sometimes magical and the magical ordinary. The book also uses stream of consciousness techniques. Stream of consciousness originates with the writer James Joyce, an Irish writer from the early 20th century, and was perfected and improved by writers such as Virginia Woolf and one of Erdrich's favorites, Faulkner, my favorite as well. Stream of consciousness writing is a form of narration where you read only the thoughts and impressions, the mental impressions of the characters, and you have to piece together the plot from what you understand of these thoughts. Instead of having a voice telling you what's happening, this character does this character does that, this happened and that happened, you divine what happens from listening, kind of eavesdropping on the thinking of the character. And the crafty writer then shapes the thinking in such a way that you, the reader, can then figure out the plot. So as you're reading the thoughts of these characters, understand that some, not all of this, is stream of consciousness. It's not a pure stream of consciousness book like Ulysses by James Joyce, or Absalom, Absalom, or To the Lighthouse by Faulkner and Woolf, respectively. It's not a pure stream of consciousness book, but it does use that technique. At other times, there is a kind of more narrative voice, which is set up by the narrative structure of the book, something which I'll talk about more in just a minute. Okay, so more about Tracks. Here's some basics about Tracks. Tracks was first published in 1988, and it has become one of Erdrich's most popular and critically celebrated of novels. It's set in the early 20th century at the formation of the reservation for Erdrich's ancestors, which they lived on in North Dakota. Tracks has an unusual structure, narrated by two different characters who alternate, telling overlapping and related stories. It's somewhat sequential. It does progress in time from early to late, but it jumps around, and it sometimes skips ahead and back. And this is because the two different characters sometimes tell the same or different parts of the same story, but from totally different perspectives. So that creates some jumps in time, something to be aware of. It's also important that readers pay attention to the chapter headings. By chapter headings, I mean the text at the very beginning of the chapter right by the chapter number. I'm going to pull the chapter heading up for you so you see what I mean. All right, so here's my copy of Tracks. I'm talking about this stuff right here, okay? So if you look at this, the first line gives, well, the first line just says chapter 1, but beneath chapter 1, the first line says, in this chapter, winter 1912. That gives the date that this chapter is set in. Line 2 gives the Native American words for the season that the chapter is set in. Different words than winter or summer or spring, like what we're used to. And then line 3 below that Native American word gives the English translation of the word for season, which makes it more understandable for us. This season is called Little Spirit Sun. Okay? And finally, the last line here gives the name of the narrator. The first chapter is narrated by Nanapush. As I said, each chapter is narrated by a different Native American. First Nanapush, then Pauline, then Nanapush again, and so on until the book finishes. So pay attention to these chapter headings. They'll help you keep oriented in time and place. More help understanding Tracks. Like a poem, Tracks is a book of powerful, resonant images in which magic and realist impulses interact and mingle. It tells the story of a people, not a single person, but a group of people, an entire tribe, a tribe that's down on its luck, that suffered a lot recently, but which is trying to kind of claw back to the status that they previously enjoyed. The book has two very different narrators who alternate chapters, as I already mentioned. Nanapush is a tribal elder and a trickster figure. He is narrating his story to a young girl named Lulu, who, we're told, is listening to her grandfather, Nanapush. Pauline is a disturbed young girl with a lot of problems. She represents the forces of assimilation into white culture, a negative force in this book. Pauline rejects her Native American heritage and converts to Catholicism. She seems to be talking to herself in her chapters, or perhaps some voice within herself, or another self within herself. She seems to be mad, and each chapter portrays a different level of the insanity that seems to be building in Pauline. More help understanding tracks. You should be aware that whether Nanapush or Pauline is narrating, you should know that, or else you're going to be confused. So again, make sure you understand who's telling the story. As you consider their characters, consider what they tell you and whether you can trust it or not. Neither character is entirely reliable, but if you understand the nature of the two characters and their biases, you can understand whether or not to trust what they're saying. Nanapush's bias is that he's ultimately a benevolent character. He hopes for the best for people, and he has good intentions, while Pauline is driven by destructive impulses. The dual perspectives that these narrators provide helps to create a contrasting set of views on historical events in this book. One from a happy old trickster, the other from a miserable and confused youngster who is torn between two worlds, the traditional world of magic and myth associated with her tribe, and the Christian world of Catholicism, which fascinates her and ultimately leads her to leave behind the tribal ways and assimilate into Catholicism. While these two characters narrate the book, the most important character in the book is actually another character named Fleur. Fleur, by the way, is the French word for flower, but I'm not sure what that exactly means in the context of the book. Fleur is a magical being with special powers rooted in nature and in particular water magic. She's said to have a special connection with the lake god of the tribe. Nanapush and Fleur are friends. Pauline and Fleur become enemies. Fleur represents the old magical ways of the Chippewa people. She's dangerous. She's sort of a threat to them, in part because they've lost a lot of these ways. But they're also fascinated by her for that same reason, because they see in Fleur, the other tribespeople see in Fleur, a character who has something that they've lost. Some plot elements and tracks might help orient you and help you to better understand the book. I don't want to spoil it, but here's some facts to help get you going. Chapter 1, the book begins with a history lesson from Nanapush to Lulu, a little girl who he addresses like his own child or grandchild. He's telling her about the tough times that his people have been through so that she understands some of the tough decisions that different characters have had to make, especially Fleur, who we learn is Lulu's mother. The next chapter provides a demonstration of the magical powers of Fleur as she takes revenge on some men who try to rape her. It's a really fantastic and thrilling chapter with lots of sort of crazy, just out of this world stuff happening in it. It's the first chapter that really draws me in and gets me into the book personally. I love chapter 2. Pauline, by the way, narrating chapter 2, observes all of what happens to Fleur, so keep in mind that Pauline is watching all this while it happens and doesn't do anything about it. That's something that becomes a plot point later in the book that you'll want to remember. More plot elements and tracks. So the book is structured on dichotomies. And dichotomies are opposing structures that relate to one another and advance a certain energy in the world. In this case, they advance the story, but in life, dichotomies advance our understanding of morality, for example, good and evil, or our understanding of gender, male and female, or our understanding of the elements, earth and air. So dichotomies are any system of opposites where the two opposites are related because they're different mirror images of one essential force. Okay? The yin and yang of our universe. That's what dichotomies are. In this book, the main dichotomy is the one provided by Fleur and Pauline, and a secondary dichotomy is the one provided by Pauline and Nanapush. First, I'm going to talk just a minute about that first one. I want to quote from a critic. Her name is Michelle R. Hessler, and she has a great quote to help us understand the book. She writes, "Fleur upholds the traditions of her ancestors and attempts to save their land from the rapid advance of white civilization, whereas Pauline enters a cloister cloister is a convent for nuns. Whereas Pauline enters a cloister, denies her Native American heritage, and brings death and destruction to the reservation. So you can see from that quote the very different forces that Fleur and Pauline represent here. This is an important dichotomy. Another is the dichotomy of the two narrators, Nanapush and Pauline. Where he is fundamentally good, he's also a trickster who loves breaking the rules and creating chaos. Pauline, in contrast, is a destructive force, but she craves rules and boundaries. He's chaotic and evil, while she is lawful and good. Bonus points if you get the Dungeons and Dragons references in that last sentence. Okay, I just brought out the nerd side in myself there. I'm going to move right along. The role of trickster in tracks, more on this. So the trickster figure is an archetype common to many Native American storytelling traditions. Many tribes have their own versions of the trickster figure, and the trickster in Native American stories is sometimes human and other times a godlike figure. Nanapush is a critical trickster and a critical character in this book. As a trickster, he provides the tension between his tribe and the white Americans who are trying to take it over and sort of run it. He does this because his trickster qualities allow him to navigate both sides of the conflict through his brilliant way with words. Nanapush, as a character, owes a clear debt to Nanabozo. Nanabozo is the name of an Anishinaabe trickster figure, the trickster figure of the Anishinaabe groups of tribes. And the fact that his name echoes this sacred figure, Nanapush, Nanabozo, suggests that he is a human embodiment of Nanabozo. Nanabozo then is the god trickster, whereas Nanapush is a human fragment of him. Nanapush's connection to Nanabozo helps him to adapt to white culture, and it helps him to push and change the will of the whites around him so that they're more respectful of his traditions and interests. Another critic writes, "It is the trickster who survives to build a new world on the ashes of the old." And that trickster in this book is Nanapush. More on the role of Nanapush the trickster. As the plot unfolds, Nanapush is able to use his gift of speech to negotiate with the U.S. government and the representatives who they send on behalf of his people. But Nanapush often tells contradictory and even outright lies in his stories. Similarly, Nanapush and Pauline's narratives, when compared, are both unreliable and often contradictory. One critic named DePriest points out that while Fleur is obviously the central character in the book, she does not get to narrate her own story. Fleur must battle two fronts, not only her external conflicts with white Americans that threaten to take her power away by cutting down the trees in the forest where she lives, but also the internal betrayals from her own people, such as Pauline, who is so jealous of Fleur that she develops a destructive relationship with her and tries to bring her down. But as the story of Fleur unfolds, we learn from the contrasting ways her character is revealed by Nanapush and Pauline that she is both loved and feared, and something about her is what's going to either save or doom this tribe. Let's talk a little bit about themes in tracks, and one of the most important is the theme that represents another, I guess, dichotomy, and this time the split in two is between Native American beliefs versus Christian beliefs. So from a Christian point of view, Native American beliefs would be heretical and paganistic. They would be the beliefs that the women in the story Young Goodman Brown were drowned and hung and tortured and killed for during the Salem witch trials. Okay, so the Native American beliefs were the framework outside of the context of the first stories in our class, right? In those stories, the Native Americans were a threat to the white Americans who lived in fear of them, in part because they'd just stolen their land. And this clash between Native American dangerous magic and sort of, I guess, white American more playful or comic magic, like in Rip Van Winkle, really shows us a lot about the differences in the types in the imaginations of the European ancestors and the Native Americans who lived in the United States before those Europeans came. It's a big clash. It's quite a conflict. Um, just as many religious Jews now see the dark side of assimilation, I'm sure you know that assimilation did a lot to destroy the Jewish faith and to destroy Jewish traditions during the 20th century, as Jews coming to the United States often gave up their religion and their traditions and became more and more Americanized. And that's a great loss, as you know better than I. I'm bringing this up to help you understand this theme in the book better, because just as many religious Jews see the dark side of assimilation, the same is true of many Native Americans. They too saw their culture vanishing as their children became more and more Americanized and adopted the ways of the white world. And this book is in part about these dangers, the dangers of assimilation, how it destroys traditional culture. Another comparison I would make that might help you to understand the book a little better is about the trickster figure thing. Let me put it this way. If the trickster figure was a Jewish holiday, which would it be? Well, you can probably see this coming. It would be Purim, right? Purim is to Judaism as Nanapush is to the book. The topsy-turvy holiday where expectations are turned upside down, the rules are suspended for a while, and chaos can lead to good things. That's the spirit of Nanapush, and the trickster spirit as well. I hope I wasn't being weird about Purim. I admit, I'm not I don't know as much about these things as you, but I'm just kind of trying to draw connections. And I know it's not exact and all that, but maybe just the loose connection will help you to get into the book a little more. I don't know. Okay, so just a little bit more and I'll be done here, digging deeper into tracks. While Native Americans participate in their own undoing in tracks, white Americans are the originating cause. One question you might ask yourself about this book is, what acts by the white Americans in it, either through contact or law, seem most destructive in the novel? Another question to think about is this one. So Fleur does not have a voice in the narration of the novel, but she's certainly critical to the tribe and the book, in part because the tribe fears her and in part because they admire her. So what do members of the tribe fear and admire about Fleur, and how does her character seem to represent the tribe? Here's a third little set of questions. What is the effect of Pauline's Christianity on her? How does race connect to religion in the book? What does it mean for a person of Native American ancestry, racially, to adopt the Christian faith? And what is the book's religious message anyway? Finally, Erdrich dramatizes many Native Americans aiding in their own destruction in tracks. This isn't a book just about the white destructive forces, but about the destructive forces that come from within the Chippewa people. Why do you think Erdrich focuses more on them, the Native Americans, and their destructive ways, their self-destructive ways, than on the originating white cause which impacts them and leads to these ways? It's a curious question and situation in the book, and one that I've given a lot of thought to and still have questions about. Well, I hope that slideshow gets you into the book a little bit more. I love this book. It took me a while to get into it, but by the time I finished chapter 2, I was hooked. It helped that I already knew how to read these kinds of books. I'd already read magic realist stories by Garcia Marquez and others, so it was easier for me to get into it than it might be for you. I recommend that you read it fairly slowly. You may need to look up some words as you go. Keep in mind who's narrating each chapter and that they can't totally be trusted when they're saying what they're saying. Also keep in mind that the magic in this book is very real to the Native American characters, and that sometimes we're not reading their words but their thinking, because parts of this are stream of consciousness. If you do all of this, I think you'll probably be able to follow the plot. I'm available to help. You can ask me questions. So let's get started early and read this book patiently and carefully and slowly. And if you do, I think you'll find that it has a lot to give, and it's, I guess, really the cornerstone of this class as we wrap things up here. So enjoy, and I'll see you again for one last video with advice on the final paper. But for now, that's it from Professor Miller, and I'll see you next time.